I've been doing a few of these kind of slower explainer videos to help bring more people with us to join our family of people who have their eyes wide open. And this one's really about dependency and the way it is possible to make people dependent without ever really letting them know. And for our American audience, one of the things that's being set up here in the UK for this winter, where ordinary British people cannot afford to heat their own homes, they cannot afford their electricity or gas bills, and because of fear of doing the wrong thing, many people are just going to turn off their supplies altogether and live a kind of weird old school caveman life inside their homes. And then in the daytime, the idea is they will go to heat banks. Heat banks will be like food banks, but instead of getting food, quite clearly, you're going to get heat. The idea is that in government buildings, in places of public interest, so say libraries or other businesses that are run probably with some government funding, will become heat banks where people can go and sit and just be warm. There's a few things about this, of course, just at the very initial level. Heat banks in the 21st century, in a Western European country, that, without human interference to the detriment of a public good, would be perfectly fine, perfectly capable of heating homes, people, without all of the human interference that is to our detriment. We would be perfectly fine and perfectly financially able to stay warm, to heat and eat this winter. So the first thing is heat banks in themselves. It's bonkers that people are accepting this almost like it's a perfectly normal thing. Oh yes, that's perfectly normal. We're going to the heat bank today. Oh, what are you, Barbara? Oh, marvellous. Yeah, we might be down there later. We'll pop in just for a warm up. That's a crazy thing. The second thing is you see how easy it is to then combine dependencies. So people might wake in their flat or their home, they'll make it to a heat bank where they will also receive food. So you're now dependent for food and dependent for heat. And then you start to see how this will change people without necessarily them realising, because being independent actually, the price of freedom is that it's quite hard, isn't it? I mean, who wants to schlep home bags of shopping that you've had to pay for in the rain or the cold with your hands biting where the plastic bags cut through? Who wants to do that? That's difficult and time consuming. Who enjoys doing that? And actually paying to heat yourself or your home. Well, why bother doing that when you could just go to a heat bank for free, see some people, have some coffee, have a nice time, socialise? It's kind of better than being self-sufficient or independent, is it? And you start to modify people's behaviour such that dependency becomes a more enjoyable lifestyle than being independent or free. And what's not seen amongst that clever sleight of hand, the magician's trick, is that the reason it becomes more pleasurable to be dependent is because independence got so hard, because those in power made it so difficult for you just to be able to fulfill the basic functions of life that you should be able to perfectly well afford. If you work as an ordinary person working a regular job, you should be able to afford to live in your own country. That is a factor that should be part and present of your life every day, that you can afford to live. And it is only by the layering in of obstacles, of hurdles, of financial penalties, of economic pressures that people have been able to take that away from you and make you believe that dependency actually is more attractive. Because in this bad new world that's being built, dependency is a lot easier. It is not hard to see how you go from a nation that is used to getting up and going to the heat bank and then picking up their food at the food bank or at the local free restaurant and the coffee machine that's also free. It's not hard to see how you create an entirely dependent population that if they were to be offered accommodation above the heat bank in a fully heated apartment. All they have to do is relinquish their old home, and who wants that old home because it's cold there and you can't get help there and your friends aren't there and you've got to take on all those responsibilities and it's a punitive way of living and you're going to have to take all that and we're going to pressurize you further. Just give that up and come and live in these flats above the heat bank, above the transport hub, and give up your car. And here's a card for you that's going to tell you where you can go, when, how far you can go and how often, what heat you can get and when, and how many credits you can build up by cutting down, even in this shared environment. You see this transition. People always said, well, Katie, that's ridiculous saying they're going to take our cars. How are they going to take my car? And then people see the pressures being put on drivers, the punitive state of our roads, more and more tickets being handed out, gas prices going up, the push for electric. Oh, electric's great, electric. And suddenly you see how they're taking our cars. Then you start to hear about heat banks, as if some charity just came up with these on their own. Watch and see how much government funding is placed into heat banks, because it's schooling people in exactly the dependent behaviour that is required for people to be utterly dependent on the state and the state to have full control. And we have examples of this in real life as we speak. I've spent a lot of time on Skid Row, not like the people who talk about homelessness or talk about the problem. I've actually slept on Skid Row. I've spent a lot of time with the locals on Skid Row. It's documented. I've been inside those homeowners' tents on Skid Row. It's not a pleasant experience, but I understand a lot of what goes on there. And one of the key things about Skid Row is it's entirely by design. It's an entirely dependent population, kept utterly dependent, and therefore super easy to control. It doesn't really impinge on the living of the elite or the super wealthy. It's in a very specific geographical area. And those people are very easy to herd, to control, and to maintain in a dependent state. Examples of how you create a fully complicit, fully dependent population are already with us. And that, I believe, is exactly the route we're being forced down here in the UK. And what's so hard to watch will be the do-gooders championing heat banks like these are a humanitarian thing. This is great. This is us looking after each other. And of course, to a degree it is, but behind that is a government working against its own people to fully control its own people. And I think it won't be too long before talks of a government physically harming its own people must surely come into play. That is what I see happening. That is what's definitely not being talked about. And the route we're going down at speed now, it is really dark. However, I'm never one to just give bad news. It's very easy to do what the boys do on the speaking circuit and just tell people the bad news. It's the easiest thing in the world. I remain relentlessly optimistic for two really important reasons. Number one, it isn't just in Disney movies or rom-coms that there's a happy ending. Good does win out. And I've seen that in my personal life over and over when some of the things that have been done to me have happened and I've held them, often for decades actually. Eventually, that stuff comes around and there is some kind of justice without me ever having to say a thing and without having the power to demand any justice for myself because I'm not allowed to have a voice. In real life, good does win out. And it's not a biblical thing. It doesn't have to be a religious thing. It is just the truth of the thing. Good wins in the end. And the second thing, and the most important to me, and this specifically to my American friends and why I spend so much time on the road rallying our side, the side that just wants the best for people in America, is that Americans never did lay down their weapons. And South Africans are the perfect example, and White South Africans will tell you any day that the weapons they handed in back in the apartheid years are the very weapons being used against them now, together with the police force who work against them. You can never rely on law and order. It's just a construct of the state. But Americans never lay down their arms. And I would argue that at no time in modern history has there ever been a greater cache of weapons across the United States of America. America still has, probably more than ever, the greatest civilian militia on the planet. And because of that, Americans have a very different approach to freedom. It's hardwired into their souls. And that doesn't mean, oh, that's all right for America then. It means that one day, with America's help, we will find freedom and independence again. And whether that's in our lifetime or not matters not. I see myself just as a baton runner. I was always a runner in the army, and I see myself as just holding the baton, and I just need to run hard enough and fast enough with it and slap it down into the hand of the next person, because there always is hope. So do remember that wherever there is darkness, there is always this bright light, and the bright light shines much brighter than all the rest. And if you stand with the light, the shadows can never get you. So anyway, that's my little explainer on what exactly is going on in the UK and why heat banks are just a label for what is actually teaching a population to be entirely dependent on the state.